It was supposed to be one of those perfect family nights, the kind you look forward to for weeks. The teenage brother and sister were buzzing with excitement as they walked into the massive arena. Their dad had just closed a big deal at work, and to celebrate, he surprised them with tickets to their first ever professional basketball game. But these weren't just any seats. They were VIP courtside seats. Think about it. Soft leather chairs practically touching the court, gourmet, snacks delivered right to your seat, and an up-close view of every slam dunk and three-pointer. It felt like stepping into a dream. The siblings couldn't stop smiling as they found their assigned spots. They high-fived each other, already planning how they'd brag about this experience to their friends at school. The energy in the arena was electric. Fans cheering, music blasting, and the smell of popcorn wafting through the air. Everything seemed perfect. That is, until someone approached them. At first, the teens didn't think much of it. People around them kept glancing over, but they figured it was because of their matching team jerseys, or maybe because they were so excited, laughing and talking loudly. But then, an usher wearing a uniform appeared beside them. He gave them a polite but hesitant smile. "Excuse me," he said, his tone careful, almost unsure. "There seems to be a mix-up. These seats are reserved for another guest." The older sibling frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked, pulling out his phone to show the digital ticket confirmation. "We've got our tickets right here, see?" The usher glanced at the screen, nodded briefly but didn't back down. Instead, he added, "Yes, I see that, but, well, these are premium seats. Are you sure they're yours?" His voice trailed off, leaving an awkward silence hanging in the air. The younger sibling, sitting next to her brother, felt her stomach tighten. Something about the way the usher spoke made her feel uneasy. She exchanged a quick glance with her brother, silently asking him what to do. Before either of them could respond, the usher continued, "If you'd like, we can move you to some other great seats, just not these ones. Now imagine being in their shoes. You've done nothing wrong. You've followed all the rules, showed proof of your tickets, and yet someone is implying that you don't belong." The older sibling crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "We paid for these seats," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the frustration bubbling inside him. "And we're staying." As the standoff continued, more people started noticing. Some nearby fans whispered among themselves while others simply watched, curious to see how things would unfold. The usher looked increasingly uncomfortable under the growing attention. Finally, he called over a supervisor, a man in a sharp suit who exuded authority. The supervisor stepped in with a practiced smile, trying to diffuse the situation. "We apologize for the inconvenience," he said smoothly, his tone friendly but firm. "Sometimes reservations get double booked. We'll make sure you're compensated if you relocate." But the siblings weren't buying it. They knew deep down that this wasn't about a mix-up or a double booking. It was about two black teenagers sitting in prime real estate, where someone clearly didn't expect them to belong. The mother, who had been quietly observing until now, decided it was time to step in. Her voice was calm but carried a weight that demanded respect. "Excuse me, sir," she began, addressing the supervisor directly. "My children have every right to sit where their tickets say they should. If there's truly an issue, perhaps you should check your system again." The supervisor hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her directness. After a moment, he nodded curtly and muttered something about handling it internally before walking away. The tension lingered, though. The siblings sat back down, unsure of what would happen next. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a night that would change everything, for them and for many others. This expanded version keeps the narrative engaging by focusing on emotions, small details, and relatable moments. It avoids complex language, uses natural phrasing, and ensures the story feels human-centric without violating any guidelines. Let me know when you're ready for part 2. The standoff between the siblings and the arena staff was far from over. As the supervisor disappeared into the crowd, the older sibling sat back down, his jaw clenched. He wasn't going to budge, not without a fight. The younger sibling glanced at him, her heart racing. She could tell he was angry, but there was something else in his eyes too. Determination. They had done nothing wrong, and they weren't about to let anyone make them feel like they didn't belong. Their mother leaned in closer, her voice low but firm. "Don't let them intimidate you," she said, placing a reassuring hand on her daughter's shoulder. "We're in the right here." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. It was clear she wasn't just speaking to her kids. She was preparing them for what might come next. The family had faced moments like this before, though never quite so publicly. Still, they knew how to stand their ground. Meanwhile, the whispers around them grew louder. Some of the nearby fans seemed sympathetic, nodding approvingly when they heard bits of the conversation. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. A few even started recording videos on their phones, sensing that this situation was about to escalate. The siblings tried to ignore the attention, but it wasn't easy. Every glance, every murmur felt like another layer of pressure piling on top of them. After what felt like an eternity, the supervisor returned, this time accompanied by 2 security guards. Their presence immediately changed the atmosphere. The once casual standoff now felt heavier, more serious. The supervisor cleared his throat and addressed the family again. "We've reviewed the situation," he said, his tone still calm but edged with authority. "And while we understand your frustration, we need to prioritize the comfort of all our guests. If you'd be willing to relocate, we can offer you upgraded concessions and merchandise vouchers as compensation." The older sibling stared at him, disbelief written all over his face. "You're missing the point," he said, his voice rising slightly. "This isn't about free stuff. We didn't do anything wrong. Why should we have to move just because someone else thinks they deserve our seats?" His sister nodded, chiming in. "Yeah, and why does it matter who's sitting here anyway? We're fans just like everyone else." The supervisor hesitated, clearly unprepared for such a direct response. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched out, broken only by the distant cheers of the crowd as the game began. Finally, the supervisor sighed and gestured toward the security guards. "If you refuse to cooperate, we may have no choice but to ask you to leave the premises," he said, his tone firmer now. That's when things really heated up. The older sibling stood up abruptly, towering over the supervisor despite being just a teenager. "Are you serious?" he shot back. "You're threatening to kick us out because we won't give up seats we paid for? This is ridiculous." By now the entire section was watching. Conversations stopped and heads turned in their direction. Even some of the players warming up on the court glanced over, curious about the commotion. The tension was palpable, and it was obvious that this wasn't just a minor disagreement anymore. It was a full-blown confrontation. Sensing that the situation was spiraling out of control, the mother pulled out her phone. She exchanged a quick glance with her son, silently asking if he wanted her to make the call. He nodded, his expression resolute. With a deep breath, she dialed a number and stepped away from the group. Within seconds, someone picked up on the other end. "Hey," she said, keeping her voice steady. "We're at the game and there's a problem. They're trying to force the kids to give up their seats. It's not okay." There was a pause as the person on the other end responded. Then her voice hardened ever so slightly. "No, we're not moving. I think you need to know about this." The call lasted less than a minute, but its impact was immediate. When she hung up, she turned back to her children and gave them a small, reassuring smile. "It's handled," she said simply. "Just stay put." The siblings exchanged a look, unsure of what exactly that meant, but whatever it was, they trusted their mom. So they sat back down, arms crossed, ready to see where this would lead. Behind the scenes, however, wheels were already in motion. The person on the other end of the call wasn't just anyone. He was someone with significant influence. Someone who didn't take kindly to seeing his family treated unfairly. And within minutes of hanging up, he was making calls of his own, starting with the highest levels of management at the arena. Back in the stands, the supervisor and security guards seemed to sense that something had shifted. They exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do next. The supervisor tried one last time to reason with the family, but it was clear they weren't budging. Frustrated and flustered, he eventually retreated, muttering something about needing to consult further. As the game tipped off, the family remained in their seats, surrounded by a mix of supportive nods and disapproving stares. The older sibling leaned over to his sister and whispered, "This is wild." She smirked, shaking her head. "Yeah, but honestly, I'm kinda glad we're sticking up for ourselves." Little did they know, this was only the beginning. By halftime, the entire arena would be talking about what happened, and the fallout would reach far beyond the basketball court. This version dives deeper into the emotions, interactions, and reactions of the characters while maintaining a natural flow. It keeps the audience engaged by focusing on relatable human experiences and building suspense for what comes next. Let me know when you'd like to proceed with Part 3. The game was in full swing now, the arena alive with the sounds of sneakers squeaking on the polished court, the referee's whistle blowing intermittently, and the crowd roaring with every basket. But for the family sitting courtside, the excitement of the match felt distant. Their focus wasn't on the players or the scoreboard, it was on what was happening around them. The tension hadn't eased, even after the supervisor backed off. Instead, it lingered like a storm cloud hovering overhead, heavy and ominous. The older sibling leaned back in his seat, trying to look calm, but his mind was racing. He glanced at his mom, who was scrolling through her phone, her expression unreadable. She had made that quick call earlier, and though she hadn't said much about it, he could tell something big was about to happen. His younger sister, meanwhile, was doing her best to act normal, munching on popcorn and pretending to watch the game. But every few minutes she'd glance over her shoulder, checking if anyone else was staring at them. And they were. Lots of people were. Some of the nearby fans were whispering among themselves, their eyes darting toward the family. A few looked sympathetic, nodding subtly when they caught the siblings' gaze. Others seemed annoyed, as if this whole situation was ruining their night. One man a few rows back even muttered loudly, "Why don't they just move?" It was hard to ignore comments like that, but the siblings tried their best to stay focused. They weren't going to let anyone make them feel small. As the first quarter came to an end, the atmosphere shifted again. Suddenly, a group of security personnel appeared near the VIP section, not just 2 or 3 guards, but a whole team. They moved quickly, surrounding the usher and the supervisor who had been involved in the earlier confrontation. The siblings watched in stunned silence as the staff members were led away without explanation. No one said a word, but the message was clear. Whatever had happened during that phone call their mom made, it had consequences. The crowd buzzed with curiosity. People started speculating wildly, leaning over to share theories with their neighbors. Some thought a celebrity was arriving late and needed the seats. Others wondered if there had been some kind of safety issue. No one suspected the truth, at least not yet. For the family, though, the sudden change was both satisfying and surreal. They hadn't asked for drama. They just wanted to enjoy the game. Now, they were at the center of it. By halftime, the story began to spread beyond the arena. Someone in the crowd posted a video online showing the security team escorting the staff away. Within minutes, social media lit up with questions and outrage. Fans demanded answers. Why were employees being removed? What exactly had gone wrong? Reporters stationed outside the venue caught wind of the commotion and started interviewing spectators streaming out for the break. By the time the second half began, hashtags like Sock Courtside Justice and Nakistan for Fairness were trending. Back inside, the family sat quietly, unsure of what to do next. The older sibling pulled out his own phone to check the news. His jaw dropped as he scrolled through updates. "Mom," he said, holding up the screen for her to see. "People are talking about us." His mom took a deep breath, looking both proud and concerned. "I know," she said softly, "but remember, we didn't ask for this. We were just standing up for ourselves." The younger sibling chimed in, her voice tinged with awe. "Do you think Dad had something to do with all this?" Her mom hesitated before nodding slightly. "Let's just say your dad doesn't take things like this lightly. When he says he'll handle it, He means it. That answer left the siblings with mixed feelings. On one hand, they were grateful for their dad's support. He always had their backs no matter what. On the other hand, they couldn't help but wonder how far this would go. Was it fair to involve so many people? Would they face backlash for causing such a scene? These questions swirled in their minds as the game resumed, but they pushed them aside for now. There would be time to reflect later. As the third quarter unfolded, rumors continued to swirl throughout the arena. Some fans cheered louder than usual, clearly siding with the family. Others grumbled under their breath, convinced the whole thing was blown out of proportion. But one thing was undeniable. The energy in the building had changed. What had started as a fun night out had turned into something much bigger, a moment that highlighted deeper issues about fairness, respect, and belonging. By the time the final buzzer sounded, signaling the end of the game, the family was exhausted. Physically, they hadn't done much. They'd simply stayed seated and refused to back down. Emotionally, though, it felt like they'd run a marathon. As they gathered their belongings and prepared to leave, they noticed reporters waiting outside, the exit. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and voices called out asking for statements. The older sibling instinctively stepped closer to his mom, while his sister clung tightly to her arm. None of them had expected this level of attention, and it was overwhelming. Still, they held their heads high, knowing they had done nothing wrong. Whatever came next, they would face it together, as a family. Unbeknownst to them, their dad was already working behind the scenes. After receiving that initial call from his wife, he had contacted not only the arena's management, but also the owner of the basketball franchise itself. He wasn't interested in revenge or causing trouble. He wanted accountability. By the time the family reached their car, decisions had already been made. Decisions that would send shockwaves through the sports world and beyond. The family stepped out of the arena into a scene that felt more like a movie than real life. A swarm of reporters and cameras greeted them, their flashes lighting up the night like fireworks. Questions came at them from every direction, fast, loud, and relentless. What happened inside? Why were staff members escorted out? Do you feel you were treated unfairly? The older sibling instinctively moved closer to his mom, shielding his younger sister as best he could. They weren't prepared for this kind of attention. None of them had imagined their quiet act of standing up for themselves would spiral into something so public. Their mom, calm but firm, raised a hand to signal she'd speak. "We came here tonight to enjoy a basketball game as a family," she began, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Instead, we were met with behavior that was disrespectful and unacceptable. My children did nothing wrong. They had tickets to these seats just like everyone else. But because of how they look, they were made to feel like they didn't belong." Her words hung in the air, silencing the crowd of reporters for a moment. People exchanged glances, some nodding, in understanding, others scribbling notes furiously. She continued, her tone unwavering. "This isn't just about us. It's about making sure no one else has to go through what my kids experienced tonight. We're not looking for trouble. We're looking for fairness." With that, she ushered her children toward the car, leaving the reporters behind. As they drove away, the younger sibling broke the silence. "Mom, do you think people will believe us? I mean, it's not like we planned any of this." Her mom glanced at her through the rearview mirror, her expression softening. "People don't always see things the way we do," she admitted. "But sometimes moments like this shine a light on bigger problems. If telling our story helps even one person feel less alone, then it's worth it." The days that followed felt like a whirlwind for the family. The story of what happened at the basketball game had taken on a life of its own, spreading far beyond their small corner of the world. Social media was flooded with posts, some supportive, others critical, but the sheer volume of attention was overwhelming. Hashtags like #Stand for Fairness and Courtside Justice trended for days, sparking debates about fairness, discrimination, and how institutions handle conflict. For the siblings, it was hard to process. One moment, they were just two regular teenagers trying to enjoy a night out. The next, they were symbols in a much larger conversation. Their dad did his best to shield them from the noise, but it wasn't easy. Reporters camped outside their house, neighbors whispered behind their backs, and even strangers approached them in public places to share their opinions. Some people offered kind words, telling the siblings they were brave for standing up for themselves. Others weren't so nice, accusing them of stirring up trouble or seeking fame. It was a lot to handle, especially for kids who hadn't asked for any of this. One evening, the family sat together in the living room, trying to make sense of everything. The younger sibling hugged a pillow tightly, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't regret what we did," she said, looking at her brother and parents. "But sometimes I wonder if it's worth all the attention. People are saying such mean things about us." Her mom reached over and squeezed her hand. "It's okay to feel that way," she said gently. "What's happening right now isn't easy, and no one expects you to have all the answers, but remember this: you didn't do anything wrong. You stood up for yourselves because you deserve to be treated fairly. That matters more than what anyone says." The older sibling nodded, though he still looked troubled. "I get that, but what happens next? Are we just supposed to wait and see how this plays out?" Their dad leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You're not alone in this," he said. "I've been talking to some people who can help make sure something positive comes out of this. We're going to use this moment to push for change, not just for us, but for everyone who's ever been made to feel like they don't belong." Accountability and action behind the scenes, the fallout from the incident was massive. The arena's management faced intense scrutiny, not just from the public but also from corporate sponsors and partners. Several major brands threatened to pull their funding unless the organization took concrete steps to address the discrimination allegations. Fans boycotted upcoming games, holding rallies outside the venue with signs that read, "Equal treatment for all and no more excuses." Internally, an investigation was launched to uncover what had really happened that night, and whether this was an isolated incident or part of a broader pattern. What they found was unsettling. Interviews with current and former employees revealed a culture of bias, where minority attendees were often questioned about their tickets or pressured to move to less desirable seats. Some staff admitted they had been instructed to prioritize certain guests over others, regardless of ticket validity. When the findings were released, the backlash was swift. Dozens of employees, including the usher, supervisor, and several higher-ups, were fired or reassigned. Training programs focused on diversity, inclusion, and anti-discrimination were implemented across all levels of the organization. The arena's owner issued a public apology, vowing to create a safer and more welcoming environment for all fans. But the changes didn't stop there. Inspired by the family's courage, advocacy groups began pushing for reforms not just in sports venues but in other industries as well. Conversations about systemic inequality gained momentum, with leaders calling for policy updates and accountability measures. The siblings' story became a catalyst for action, a reminder that standing up for yourself can spark meaningful change. Finding strength in solidarity, as the weeks went by, the family started receiving messages from people all over the country. Many shared their own experiences of being treated unfairly because of their race, age, or background. A grandmother wrote to say she'd been turned away from a restaurant despite having a reservation. A college student described being denied entry to a concert even though his ticket was valid. Each story added another layer to the bigger picture, showing the siblings they weren't alone in their struggle. One letter stood out in particular. It came from a young boy who said he wanted to grow up to be like them, brave enough to stand up for himself and others. "You showed me that it's okay to speak up when something isn't right," he wrote. "Thank you for being heroes." Reading those words brought tears to the siblings' eyes. They hadn't set out to be role models, but hearing from people who saw them as such filled them with a sense of purpose. Their mom framed the letter and hung it on the wall, a reminder of why their fight mattered. A new chapter. Months later, the family returned to the same arena, not as victims, but as honored guests. The franchise invited them to attend a special ceremony recognizing their courage and advocating for continued progress. As they walked into the building, the atmosphere was different this time. Staff members greeted them warmly, fans cheered, and banners hung from the rafters celebrating unity and equality. When it was time for the siblings to speak, they stood side by side, gripping the microphone tightly. "We didn't ask for this. Spotlight," the older sibling began, his voice steady but heartfelt. "But if sharing our story helps even one person feel seen and valued, then it's worth it." His sister nodded, adding, "Our fight doesn't end here. Bias exists everywhere, and it's up to all of us to challenge it whenever we see it." The crowd erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. In that moment, the siblings knew they'd made a difference, not just for themselves, but for generations to come. Far from seeking revenge, their dad used his influence to push for lasting reforms. With renewed determination, he partnered with advocacy groups to promote diversity initiatives across industries. And as for the siblings, they continued living life unapologetically, proving that no obstacle was too big when faced together. The ceremony at the arena was unlike anything the family had ever experienced. Bright lights illuminated the court, and a sea of fans filled the stands, their cheers echoing through the massive space. For once, the attention didn't feel overwhelming. It felt empowering. As the siblings stood on stage, surrounded by their parents and representatives from the franchise, they couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come since that tense night months ago. What started as a simple act of standing their ground had grown into something much bigger, a movement for fairness, respect, and equality. The older sibling glanced at his sister, who gave him an encouraging smile. She looked different now, not just because she'd grown taller or her hair was styled differently, but because there was a newfound confidence in her eyes. They both carried themselves differently these days, walking with heads held high, knowing they had done something meaningful. Their mom, sitting in the front row, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while their dad clapped proudly, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. This wasn't just their victory. It was a shared triumph for everyone who believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard. When it was time for them to speak, the older sibling took a deep breath before stepping up to the microphone. His voice trembled slightly at first, but as he spoke, it grew steadier. "We never imagined this would happen," he admitted, looking out at the crowd. "All we wanted was to enjoy a basketball game together as a family. But sometimes, life throws you into situations where you have to choose between staying quiet or speaking up. We chose to speak up." He paused, letting his words sink in. The audience listened intently, hanging on to every sentence. "It wasn't easy," he continued. "There were moments when we doubted ourselves, when people said mean things or told us we were overreacting. But we knew one thing for sure. We deserved to be treated fairly, and so does everyone else." His sister stepped forward then, taking her turn at the mic. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying a strength that surprised even her. "This isn't just about us," she said, glancing at the crowd. "It's about making sure no one else feels like they don't belong. Whether it's at a basketball game, a restaurant, or anywhere else, everyone deserves to feel welcome. If sharing our story helps make that happen, then everything we went through was worth it." As she finished, the arena erupted into applause. People stood, cheering and whistling, some wiping away tears. It was a powerful moment, one that reminded the siblings why they had fought so hard in the first place. They weren't just fighting for themselves. They were fighting for a future where no one had to question whether they belonged. A ripple effect of change. What happened next was unexpected but beautiful. Inspired by the siblings' courage, other families began sharing their own stories of unfair treatment. A father recounted how he and his son were denied service at a diner despite having waited patiently for a table. A college student described being turned away from a concert venue, even though her ticket was valid. Each story added another layer to the conversation, showing just how widespread the problem was and how urgent the need for change. Advocacy groups seized the opportunity to push for broader reforms. Campaigns were launched to educate businesses and institutions about implicit bias and discrimination. Workshops were organized to train employees on creating inclusive environments. Even schools got involved, teaching students about empathy, fairness, and the importance of standing up against injustice. For the siblings, Seeing their story spark such widespread action was humbling. They never imagined they'd inspire so many people, but they quickly realized that their courage had given others permission to speak up too. One day, while scrolling through social media, the younger sibling stumbled upon a video of a group of kids reenacting their stand at the arena. In the clip, the children argued passionately about fairness, quoting lines the siblings had said during interviews. It brought tears to her eyes. "Look at this," she said, showing her brother. "They're learning from us." He grinned, shaking his head in disbelief. "I guess we really did start something, huh?" Life after the spotlight. As time passed, the initial frenzy of media attention began to die down. Life returned to a semblance of normalcy for the family, though things were undeniably different. The siblings found themselves more aware of the world around them, the subtle looks, the hushed comments, the unspoken biases. But instead of letting it weigh them down, they used it as fuel to keep pushing for change. They joined local advocacy groups, attended community events, and spoke at schools about their experience. Their message was simple: fairness starts with each of us. Their dad, meanwhile, continued using his influence to drive systemic change. He partnered with organizations focused on diversity and inclusion, funding initiatives aimed at breaking down barriers in various industries. "This isn't just a black issue or a sports issue," he often said during interviews. "It's a human issue, and until we address it head-on, we'll keep seeing the same problems repeat themselves." Their mom became a source of strength not just for her family, but for others going through similar struggles. She started a support group for parents, raising children in marginalized communities, offering advice and encouragement to those navigating difficult conversations about race and identity. "You can't shield your kids from everything," she told the group during one meeting. "But you can teach them to stand tall no matter what." How the siblings had achieved so much, they knew the work wasn't done. Bias and discrimination didn't disappear overnight, and progress often felt slow. But they remained hopeful, drawing inspiration from the countless people who had rallied behind them. Every letter, every message, every kind word reminded them that they weren't alone in this fight. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, the younger sibling looked at her parents and smiled. "Do you think we'll ever stop talking about what happened?" she asked. Her dad chuckled, setting down his fork. "Probably not," he said. "And honestly, I don't think we should. Stories like ours remind people that fairness matters, that standing up for yourself matters, that being brave matters." Her mom nodded in agreement. "Besides," she added, "you two have already proven that you can handle whatever comes your way. No matter what happens next, we'll face it together. As a family." The older sibling raised his glass of juice in a mock toast. "To sticking together," he said with a grin. "To sticking together," the rest of the family echoed, clinking their glasses. In that moment, they weren't just a family who had faced adversity. They were a team, united by love, resilience, and a shared commitment to making the world a better place. And as they laughed and joked around the table, it was clear that their journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, yes, but also opportunities to grow, learn, and continue inspiring others. After all, standing up for what's right isn't just a one-time act, it's a lifelong mission.